Another exciting conversation on tap today. Here today with Heath Barnett, who's a go-to-market advisor, head of sales, someone I follow really closely on LinkedIn. So, Heath, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Peter. I'm excited to be here today.
Absolutely. Well, as I said, I've been following you for a while on LinkedIn. We engage a lot on LinkedIn too, and love to hear a little bit about your background and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I feel like that's a loaded question. I think like if I was to kind of give it around themes, like I'm a builder, optimizer, and scaler. That is
Yeah.
really what I've been hired from any organization that I've had the opportunity to be a part of. I like to consider myself a sales leader and revenue architect.
Hmm.
And why I think those are two very different things. I think a sales leader is one that helps lead on the execution, and a revenue architect is one that helps uncover the path to least resistance, right? To where we can
Hmm.
actually be very efficient with our sales. And then I've also, my wife makes fun of me when she, hears me say it, but I call myself like the inspector of go to market.
Right. Right.
And part of that is like building teams, channels, and playbooks that scale. And so where that journey's taken me, I started my first startup in 2016. After that, I joined Uber to launch markets and launch new verticals at Uber. And since then, I've been across different verticals, different marketplace and B2B SaaS organizations,
Hmm.
really helping blend the kind of product led growth and product led sales experience.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I appreciate that. So you mentioned about being a revenue architect. That's in order to like set up those processes. Data has got to be a big part of that. So curious how you use data as part of like your day to day, but probably more importantly, in that with that architect hat on, how do you use data to kind of set those processes and set those strategies?
Yeah, I have to give kudos to both Uber and also my consulting days when I was at Accenture.
Hmm.
At Uber, we really were not able to just be sales leaders. We had to be actual operators, right? Because
Right.
managing marketplaces, especially a three-sided marketplace, like we had to know the data in and out because we
Hmm.
had to understand where are we actually winning on the supply side, where are we winning on the demand side, and basically like an economist, like how do I create that equilibrium?
Right.
And so I think like for me, first and foremost, I think number one, like I've always lived by is like, you can tell me anything, but numbers don't lie.
Right.
Right. And in the world of sales, unfortunately, like we like to make things sound better than they actually might be. And so that's number one for me as I look at the data, because the data can help me understand what the story actually is.
Mm.
And it also allows us to create a better path forward. The way I like to think of it is like, data is your GPS
Hmm.
getting you to a destination. So, right. And what I mean by that is without data, it's like you're given a map from a gas station and you're trying
Yeah.
to figure out how do I get to that destination? Like you have to figure out what you think is going to be the best way to go, what you think is going to be the path that has the least amount of traffic.
Right.
Where a GPS, it gives you multiple routes. It actually changes in real time to where it makes sure that you're getting to your destination in the most efficient way forward. And that's what I think data helps us actually like create is that true go to market efficiency.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, just to continue your metaphor, the folks that say, you know what, I'm going to trust my gut on this, they're probably driving up a snowy mountain pass right now.
You know what? It's funny because we still have to do that though from time to time, right? Like
Mm.
I'm sure plenty of people that listen to this or read this, when you're early in a go to market, sometimes you do have to go with your gut.
Yeah.
I think the power of data also is it creates alignment across
Hmm.
the different functions to where as a team you can make that gut feel or that hypothesis. I like to think it from like a scientific perspective,
Yeah.
but at least everybody is still now focused and rowing in the same way forward. And then data will help you tell you where do I need to make adjustments, where do I need to actually fine tune things.
Yeah. I mean, a hypothesis is a great way of thinking of it. It's like, you do need a starting point of which direction you're going to head into, and then data is going to tell you hot or colder, and then you can start to zoom in.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
how do you use data with when you're talking to your teams, the teams you've built, how are you using data generally on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned through my career, with there's a double edged sword of being able to dig into data and actually understand and uncover. One is a lot of times like too much data can also be just as bad, right? Data
Right.
paralysis is a real thing, especially when you, as a leader, if you are presenting, trying to help your team understand the why behind a change
Hmm.
that's being made or something you're focusing on.
Yeah.
When you have too much data, you're going to lose your crowd, right?
Right.
And so that's for me is like I like to use data to help me build the story. And then as I tell that story, data can help supplement with questions or actually like closing those gaps that people might have.
Mm.
And it's something just like what I was saying before is I think great leaders can explain the what. I mean, sorry, normal leaders explain the what, great leaders explain the why, exceptional leaders can explain the how. And
Mm.
that's how I leverage data is to actually be able to tell people on my team how things are done.
Right.
Your sales rep listening to this, so many times quota has been given out, but like you sit there and think, how do I actually achieve this? And it's a problem in today's market is top down. We just say this is the results we expect you to give to us,
Right.
and we need to do a better job of actually showing how we're going to
Hmm.
achieve those results.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, there's so many. A lot of salespeople are hungry for, tell me what is your experience, tell me what you've learned so that I can get better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that leads into question of your favorite metric, your underappreciated metric. I think the conceit of this series is talking with folks about the kinds of measurements that go underused. So it sounds like this notion of the how is important for you. So how do you measure that? What do you look at? What is that metric that's underappreciated for you?
Yeah, so for me, it's the strike zone, right? And I think like the concept of the strike zone is it helps you really analyze the funnel from top
Mm.
all the way to bottom, especially in a sales organization. But I also think it helps us stop focusing on the false negatives.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is I think that one thing that's happening in the market is it's changing. The easy days of like B2B SaaS sales like is coming to a pretty quick screeching halt.
Yep.
And I think one of the problems with that is just like with a lot of startups that received a lot of capital from VCs that probably shouldn't have during that time.
Mm.
There's also a lot of bad sales habits that were put in place.
Right.
And so, why the strike zone is something I pay attention to is because it's very easy for us to focus on the false positives, which is call metrics, email metrics, where the strike zone is more about focusing how do all of those connect together to
Mm.
actually help us understand where we're winning and where we're losing.
Got it. So now, just to kind of connect it to your
Yeah.
how do I calculate that? How do I figure out what is my strike zone?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I think like let's break down the components of the strike zone, right? So let's start at the top of the prospecting. So you have your call to connect ratio,
Hmm.
which is of all the phone calls I make, what percentage of actual people am I talking to of connections?
Right.
The second is then how many of those connections lead to meetings booked? That's my connected to meeting booked ratio.
Hmm.
Then you have your show rate, which is like, okay, of all the meetings that I actually book, how many people actually show up?
Right.
Then that's where we start actually measuring conversion, right? Is like, okay, of those meetings, how many opportunities do I create? What's that conversion metric? And then what's my win rate look like?
Mm.
And so when you combine all of those, it actually allows you to actually take, let's say, your target at the end of every quarter or month or whatever your targets are set. And you can actually start to kind of back bake it to
Yeah.
understanding how do I create monthly, weekly, or daily metrics.
Mm.
So I'll give you an example real quick for this one, just to help like the audience break it down too. So let's say that my quota for the quarter is, let's say it's $100,000. Okay.
Right.
We'll make some assumptions. My average deal size is 10,000. Let's assume my win rate is 20%. My opportunity conversion rate is 30%. I have a 70% show rate. And then my connected to meetings book is 50%. And let's say my call to connect ratio is 25%.
Hmm.
A lot of bunch of numbers.
Right.
But when you actually put this down into a quick spreadsheet, all you have to do is really input the numbers and it actually spits it out for you.
Yeah.
So if I take that 100,000, let's just break it down. Like, okay, I have a win rate. My average deal size is 10,000. That means I need to win 10 deals.
Yeah.
Okay. If my win rate is 20%, that means I have to create 50 opportunities over
Hmm.
this next quarter.
Hmm.
In order for me to do that, I have to have 167 meetings. I have to book 239 meetings.
Hmm.
I have to connect with 478 people, which means I almost have to make about 2,000 phone calls.
Right.
So that sounds like a bunch of big numbers. So to connect the dots of like how I use this to connect the how with my reps is then I then break it down by like what is that month, week, and the daily controllables that we can control.
Hmm.
So to give you an example, like I like to focus on connections.
Hmm.
So with my teams, it's not, hey, 50 phone calls a day. It's like, hey, our target is to get 10 connections a day.
Right.
And the reason on the connections is because some reps might have a better call to connect ratio, some might have a lower one. And
Hmm.
so that's where, as a coach, I'm now tailoring the process as to, hey, here's what your data currently tells you you need to do.
Yeah.
It also now gives us a path forward of like, where are the actual gaps?
Hmm.
Right? Like, so when you break that down, is you could have an amazing, amazing win rate, right?
Yeah.
And this happens way too often. You see this seller, they have a great win rate, they're bringing in deals. So you're just like, oh, they're a rock star. Let's just leave them alone.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's usually our rock stars that we can actually optimize just a little bit, where it's like a 2% change in one of their funnel metrics makes drastic, drastic result changes for your organization. And so that's what this strike zone allows us to do, is because that rep might have a 50% win rate,
Yeah.
but their call to connect ratio might be like 5%.
Hmm.
And so that's where I'm thinking is like, okay, are you going after the wrong leads up front? Like,
Hmm.
what is your process of actually like conducting pre research, pre qualifying? It allows us to really create a coaching framework from this too.
Yeah. Well, first off, I got to say how impressed I am with your math abilities to rock those numbers so quickly. But second, the thing I really like about this approach is too often people will look at the journey or the sales process, and they'll look at individual metrics.
Mm-hmm.
And what I like about this is it's taking that holistic approach to it. Because if you can, as you said, like you can be blowing out one part of the conversion rates, and or marketing might be coming in saying, hey, we're crushing this, this landing page or this campaign. It's converted into a whole bunch of MQLs. But if those aren't converting further down the funnel,
Mm-hmm.
you know, then you've got a problem that you need to start diagnosing and solving. And the
Yep.
second thing I love about it is that it is tuned to people.
Mm-hmm.
Like I in that example where you're saying about the win rate, one rep having a great win rate. Yeah, you're right. If that person had a better call to connect ratio, um, then the numbers that they could be delivering must be incredible. And they may not just not be, they may be fantastic at closing because they have great technical experience or great rapport or just great closing skills in general. But you're right. Yeah. If they're missing something up funnel, they can be trained. They can be coached.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and then how do you bring that to your team? Like, is it, like, are you doing that on a weekly basis then? And look, because you said you break down those numbers, the components. So then are you then having, you and your team, looking at those numbers on a weekly basis and then having the coaching based on that?
Yeah. So number one is like on the daily metrics, I will usually look at a 4 week average. Okay.
Hmm.
I think that's also another problem is you start becoming a micromanager when you're
Yeah.
focused on like, did you make, this many connections, or did you do this on a daily basis?
Right.
It's the world of sales. We have days where we're going to be very, very heavy in demos. Another day is going to be a very heavy prospecting day. So like you have to look at every day is mutually exclusive, but what we
Hmm.
care about is what does that productivity trend line look like?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important for any sales leader that's listening to this, because that's where you can make the mistake of like breaking all this down and then just getting too much into the meticulous details and not looking at the bigger picture.
Right.
But then this also gives that North Star metric. So when I actually create that strike zone, it is something that I look at a weekly basis. We don't look at last week's results,
Hmm.
because in the world of sales, right, what you do today, you're probably not going to see the results for 30, maybe even 60 days down the road.
Yeah.
And so what we will do is we'll kind of treat our data like cohorts as well. Right?
Hmm.
It's like what's our 30-day trend line look like? How does that compare to our actual 60-day trend line?
Right.
Are we seeing improvements? Are we seeing a gap?
Yeah.
And this one is in where I coach my managers, and I took this from Winning by Design. I love the concept. It's the Rex framework.
Mm.
Right? So it's result, effort, knowledge, and skills. And that's exactly how we look at this is, okay, well, what are the results? I think number one is your results depends on your time frame.
Yeah.
Right. So to your point, if I'm looking at a monthly basis, I care about how many deals were actually closed. If I'm looking at it a weekly basis, I care more about were meetings booked? Did people actually show up to meetings? Because when we look at the actual strike zone, I know if we're meeting those micro commitments that will allow us to get to that major commitment. Okay.
Yeah. That's great.
But the way to look at it is look at the results. Were the results there? Yes or no? If the results aren't there, was the effort there?
Hmm.
If the effort wasn't there, it's hard for us to actually understand if there's a knowledge or skill gap because we
Right.
need the effort to be there first. So there's
Right.
coaching tip number one. But then coaching tip number two is let's assume the results aren't there, but the effort is. Okay, well, now it's your job as a coach to identify where's the knowledge or skill gap. But
Hmm.
let's use that rep that had the great win rate. They have a great win rate, but they have a really bad, call to connect ratio. So then, like as a coach, my knowledge or skill gap that I want to dig into is: are they calling at the right times? Are they
Hmm.
calling the right people? Right? Like
Right.
we know when they get up to bat, they are hitting home runs.
Right.
How do we make sure that they're getting up to bat more frequently?
Right. That's great. Well, Heath, it's been a pleasure to talk with you and to get caught up and to hear all about the strike zone. So I appreciate you coming on to the chat.
I appreciate the time, Peter. I always love this.
Absolutely. Thanks.